Well, some of you may know this, but the month of April that we're in right now happens to be National Poetry Month. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the home of one of the greatest American poets, Emily Dickinson, in Amherst, Massachusetts. We got to tour her home. We got to see the room and the desk where she wrote more than 1,800 poems, many of which have become classics. A few years before that, I was on a spiritual retreat in New Mexico, and I happened to tour another famous home. It was the home of the American painter Georgia O'Keeffe. And it was so cool to be able to see the doorway and the ladder and the tree that appear in so many of her famous works of art. And then, of course, we know millions of people a year flock to Graceland to go to the home of Elvis Presley. We, the lovers of poetry and art and music, we want to go to these places to experience firsthand where that divine spark was lit, where that creativity was born. And so it makes sense for us as Christians, as lovers of Jesus, that we want to go to the place where he was born. And many of us want to travel to the Holy Land. Some of you have been to the Holy Land. A few years ago, one of my friends came back from the Holy Land. He was so excited to tell me all the things that he had done. And he said, "Sal, you're not going to believe this. I got to walk into Jesus' boyhood home. I actually saw the place where he and Joseph would do their carpentry work. And then I also went to the place where Jesus and the disciples had their Last Supper." He said, "And you're not going to believe this, but I actually got to look inside the empty tomb." Now, my friend was so excited that I didn't want to burst his bubble and tell him that he probably didn't go into those actual places. Because archaeologists and historians tell us that most of the sites that we read about in the Bible, they no longer exist in their original form. And most of the documents that we have that kind of point to the location of those sites are fragmentary. They're ambiguous at best. So some of you may be familiar with what's called the Via Dolorosa. It's the road that Jesus walked to the cross. Millions of people every year go to the Holy Land to walk that route. They've been doing so for centuries. But a few years ago, archaeologists discovered that the Via Dolorosa was actually on the other side of town. And then, as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, Emmaus, which we hear about in today's gospel reading, it isn't found anywhere. It's not in any ancient document. It's not on any map. The only thing we know about Emmaus is just in this one gospel story I just read for you from Luke's gospel, just those few sentences. Yet if you go to the Holy Land today, there's not one, there's not two, there's 6 different sites that claim to be the road to Emmaus. So which one is it? Well, I don't think it really matters so much. Because I think that no matter where we are, we're standing on holy ground. You don't have to go to the Holy Land to experience the presence of Christ in your midst. I think that's why Marcus Borg, the theologian, said, "The road to Emmaus is nowhere. The road to Emmaus is everywhere." And you know, me, the former English teacher, I like to take apart words. The word nowhere, if you take it apart, it spells out now, here. The road to Emmaus is now, and it's here, and it's everywhere. Another theologian, John Dominic Crossan, said, "The road to Emmaus never happened, but the road to Emmaus is always happening." And I think he may have adapted that from Joseph Campbell, because Joseph Campbell famously said, "A myth is something that never happened, but is always happening." So I don't know for sure about these resurrection stories from the Bible, where they happened or how exactly they happened, but I do know stories of resurrection are happening all the time. We just need to open our eyes to see them. And that's what this story about the road to Emmaus is all about. It's a highly symbolic story. Everything in this story has meaning. So, for example, the name itself, Emmaus, it's a Hebrew word that means spring. We know spring is a time of new growth and new life. So the road to Emmaus symbolizes the road to that place of new growth and new life for us. And we hear in the story that it is 7 miles from Jerusalem, 7 miles from the Holy Land. Now, 7 is a highly spiritual number. When you read it in the Bible, it's not meant to be understood literally. You'll see 7 appear so many times. God created the world in 7 days. Jesus had 7 I am statements. Jesus said, forgive 70 times 7 times. In the book of Revelation, there are 7 signs. And then, of course, we know there are 7 seas, there are 7 colors of the rainbow, there are 7 chakras. The number is meant to be understood spiritually, and it means spiritual completion. So the road to Emmaus is symbolic of our spiritual journey as we journey to wholeness, to holiness. You see that these 2 disciples who are walking the road, they are so sad. Their teacher and friend has just been crucified. They gave up everything to follow this guy, and now he's been killed. They're confused, they're sad, they're in despair. But as they walk and they talk about how they're feeling, they're not walking alone. The presence of the Christ is with them. It's like Jesus said before he died. He said, when 2 or more are gathered in my name, I am with them. So there are the 2 gathered in his name, in his spirit. And he was with them, but they didn't recognize it. They just thought they were talking to a stranger. Now, obviously, they knew Jesus. He was their teacher and friend, but the person they were talking to didn't look like Jesus. So they didn't recognize him. You may remember the same thing at Easter. When Mary Magdalene discovered that the tomb was empty, she's talking to someone whom she believes is the gardener. She doesn't realize that that gardener was Jesus because it doesn't look like him. And the point of all of this is that Christ is in our midst, in the strangers that we meet along the road. But our eyes aren't always open to seeing the Christ that is within them. The whole purpose of the road to Emmaus is to open our eyes, to see that God walks along with us on the journey of life. God's presence, God's light is all around us, no matter where we are, no matter where we go. We just have to awaken to it. And you see the disciples in this story awaken to it when Jesus breaks the bread. That's when they go, oh, that was Jesus. And I loved in our words of integration and guidance this morning that it said that the word companion actually means with bread. Companio, with bread. We are companions for one another on the journey, and we are to feed one another, nourish one another along that journey. Just as Christ has fed us, we are to feed one another. And so, my friends, my hope for us in this season of Easter, as we continue this journey of new growth and new life, this season of resurrection, may we more consciously walk the spiritual path. Meaning, let us awaken more fully each day to the signs of Christ that are all around us, particularly in the stranger. You may remember Jesus said to the disciples, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you clothed me. And the disciples scratched their heads. They said, Jesus, When did we ever see you any of those ways? And Jesus said, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. We need to recognize the Christ, my friends, in the stranger, in the marginalized, in the outcast. When we open our eyes to Christ's presence, we'll see it all around us. And in this week that we are celebrating Earth Day, may you open your eyes to seeing the presence of Christ in creation, in the birds and the trees and the flowers popping up out of the ground. Those are signs of resurrection and new life. And may we open our eyes to see that the road to Emmaus isn't just in the Holy Land. It is here, it is now, and it is everywhere, because we are standing on holy ground. May it be so. Amen.